Good evening, plant people. Thank you for joining us this evening. I hope you have your beverage of choice. I'm drinking a non-alcoholic IPA. Tonight we'll be screening the Great Florida Riverway. This was a film released by the Free the Ocklawaha Coalition. They've recently been making a big effort to get the Ocklawaha River restored by breaching the Rodman Dam. And this has included efforts such as contacting legislators, printing a beautiful flip book, and delivering it to various actors, be it at the state level, local level, and county level. And they've been organizing coalition meetings, which I have been a part of. Before we begin, I would like to encourage everyone to register for our 40th annual conference. Florida Native Plant Society has put on an annual conference for 40 years, and this is the first time it will be virtual. We've worked really hard to get a solid lineup of very interesting speakers, and we've picked a platform specifically for its networking capabilities and ease of presentation. So it has an app, which you can use but don't have to use, and it has a website that you can visit from any desktop computer. So we really would like you to register as soon as possible. Go to fnps.org/conference to register and to peruse the agenda. So I tentatively called this series Drink and Learn to call to mind the educational experience of the Lunch and Learns, but in a more formal setting where one can wear graphic tees of native moths and perhaps drink a non-alcoholic beer. However, perhaps you have a better title for this series. Would you like it to be called something different? If you could post your suggestions in the chat while the film is streaming, I will take those suggestions, put them in a Google form, and then put the Google form link in the chat, and then everybody can vote. And may the best series title win. So whatever we decide to call this, I have scheduled one for next month, May 1st, before the conference, and it's with Dr. Patty Anderson, and it's going to be titled The Making of a Florida Botanist. So whatever questions you have for Patty, please send them to me ahead of time. I will put a reminder in the weekly reminder email. So are you ready to learn about the Ocklawaha River? The film is an hour and 9 minutes. Gene and Jim are on standby, ready to start the Q&A as soon as the film is over. We'll be addressing questions sent to me ahead of time by Florida Native Plant Society members. And then if people are still willing to stay on, then we can talk about things that come up in the chat. All right, thank you again for joining us, and I hope everyone enjoys the film.
There's no greater opportunity in America than we have with the Great Florida Riverway. Over the next hour, we'll learn how revitalizing this three-river system will improve the economy and water quality along this 217-mile water lane. We'll learn how a misguided project of the 1960s seriously damaged fisheries and still threatens 100 miles of critical estuary in Northeast Florida. Find out how a simple solution can reverse half a century of environmental decline. See how it will reconnect the Ocala to Osceola Wildlife Corridor. Discover the facts about economic opportunity, job creation, and revitalization of waterfront communities from Lake Apopka to Silver Springs to Palatka and beyond. Stay with us for the history, science, and promise of 3 rivers, 50 springs, and 1 solution. Join us on the Great Florida Riverway.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this program exploring the Great Florida Riverway. I'm Shannon Blankenship.
And I'm Greg Jones. We're looking forward to introducing you to one of our favorite places, a vast 217-mile system flowing from the Green Swamp and Lake Apopka north to the Atlantic Ocean. 3 rivers, 50 springs, a true economic and environmental treasure. I like to think of this area as the Everglades of the North.
It's definitely a Florida treasure. And American Rivers just designated the Ocklawaha the centerpiece of the Great Florida Riverway, one of the 10 most endangered rivers in America. On this program, we'll explore the obstacles and opportunities associated with restoring this riverway back to its historic splendor.
Known as the sweetest water lane in the world, it's been home to mastodons, Native Americans, and steamboat travelers. Rising from the swamps and lakes of central Florida, it moves through the Ocala National Forest past Ocala. Then, fed by Silver Springs, the Ocklawaha travels swiftly through lush forest north towards Palatka. Next, it becomes a slow-moving, often clogged river, now severed from its natural connection to the lower Ocklawaha, the St. Johns River, and the Atlantic Ocean. Over 50 years ago, before the Rodman Dam, the Ocklawaha River provided enough downstream water for healthy fish and shellfish from Palatka to Jacksonville, the home of the St. Johns River estuary. The dam, a remnant of the failed cross-Florida barge canal, severed a significant three-river system: the Ocklawaha, the Silver, including historic Silver Springs, and the St. Johns. Visitors to Silver Springs lost the magnificent catfish under the glass-bottom boats, and manatees lost potential winter habitat, which they need now more than ever. The dam flooded 7,500 acres of floodplain forest, 20 springs, and miles of the Ocklawaha. And the destruction continues today. The artificial lake formed by the dam, clogged with plants, has lost many users. Boat ramps are frequently unusable. The Rodman Dam, beyond its life expectancy, continues to harm water, wildlife, and forests upstream and down. It's caused American Rivers to designate the Ocklawaha as one of the most endangered rivers in North America. Now, it's time to complete the Great Florida Riverway. We can economically bypass that dam and create a healthier river system. Setting the Ocklawaha free will bring back 20 lost springs, habitat for historic fish, hundreds of manatees, and thousands of acres of healthy floodplain forest for wildlife. We can restore the Great Florida Riverway for people from Lake Apopka to the Atlantic Ocean, creating jobs and recreation opportunities for everyone, and expand our Northeast Florida economy. Let's restore this American treasure and all the rivers in this, the Great Florida Riverway.
Now, many Floridians know little about this historic system, and many don't understand the history, ecology, and economic connections between the Ocklawaha-Harris chain of lakes, Silver River and Silver Springs, the Ocklawaha, St. Johns River, and the Atlantic. You know, it kind of reminds me of the hip bone connected to the thigh bone connected to the ankle bone, you know, that old thing. It's all connected. The rivers are really part of one big river system.
One change, a connected, free-flowing Ocklawaha, could make a significant difference to this system. But before we get into the science, let's learn a bit about the Great Florida Riverway's rich history and how we ended up where we are today.
The Great Florida Riverway is a treasure trove of natural and human history. The Ocklawaha River we know today is a young river, emerging near the end of the last ice age, only 17,000 years ago. Yet its natural history spans more than 34 million years, back to a time when Florida was an underwater world full of marine life, including large crocodilians, primitive whales, and a myriad of invertebrates. Today, Florida is known for its rich fossil deposits, especially of mammals from the Pleistocene, including giant sloths, glyptodonts, saber cats, and mammoths. Many of these fossils have been found along the Ocklawaha River watershed. The Riverway also tells a story of a rich human history. The first nomadic hunters arrived here 14,000 years ago. Later, various indigenous groups, including the Timucuan-speaking Aquara people, made their home in this rich watershed. European settlers from Spain, France, and England also colonized parts of the Riverway, pressuring the indigenous tribes. In 1770, the Creek Indians from Georgia, the Choctaw from Mississippi, and other tribes displaced from their native lands by European settlers came to Florida. By the late 1700s, several early Seminole towns already existed in the vicinity of the Ocklawaha. Around that same time, William Bartram described the natural richness of the region and documented the history of the local tribes. In the late 1800s, the steamboat became the shipping method of choice, transporting citrus and wood north towards Palatka and Jacksonville. The steamer also brought with it passengers to various cities along the water route, becoming the roots of wintertime tourism in Florida. By the early 1920s, the steamboats had been replaced by the automobiles. In the 1930s, regional politicians lobbied the government to fund the construction of a canal across Florida as part of an economic recovery program. But it wasn't until 1963 that the money was allocated for the construction project that would change the face of the historic Ocklawaha, the Cross Florida Barge Canal.
Engineers have long dreamed of a cross-Florida canal. The early Spanish considered it almost 400 years ago. Andrew Jackson recognized its defense potential. At long last, all the state and federal agencies involved unanimously agreed upon one route, one plan, a toll-free, lock-type barge canal, higher than sea level.
Ladies and gentlemen, it pleases me to report to the people of Florida and the nation that the long-sought Cross-Florida Barge Canal is now well underway.
They come up with this idea, this plan to turn into the Cross-Florida Barge Canal. And in the 1960s, at a time flush with liberalism, we can do anything. We can put a man on the moon, we can reshape Florida, so we might as well build this canal. It starts in 1964. It seems to be going great guns, everybody's excited. And then people begin to raise environmental questions about it. Not just conservation, but land preservation, and the fact that the Ocklawaha River particularly is a wild and natural resource that is irreplaceable and irreplicable. If we destroy this, we're going to destroy something that we can never have again. The damage that was done is best seen when the reservoir is drawn down, and that kind of ancient forest, that ghost forest is there, and you can see those trees that are all cut at the same level. It's a really eerie sight, but it's a really kind of sad sight to see what had to be done in order to make something that never was completed. But there's still remnants of it infrastructure-wise, particularly on the Ocklawaha, especially the Rodman Dam. People have been fighting to get the dam down for as long as the dam has been up. So why is it still up here? Every governor, with the exception of Scott, has said take it down, and that's Democrat as well as Republican. Half of the population or more of Putnam County has not been alive when that river flowed freely. So this is all they know. So if this is all you know, this is natural. And 50 years, that's a long time.
It is the damage and neglect of those more than 50 years that resulted in the Ocklawaha being designated as one of America's most endangered rivers for 2020. The dam didn't just fracture 3 river systems, it created a divide in our communities. This division has damaged the Ocklawaha, Silver, and St. Johns River, world-famous Silver Springs, and the Northeast Florida economy. Restoration of these 3 magnificent river systems is an opportunity for economic resurgence, reinvestment in tourism and recreation, and the creation of additional fishing access points. Greg, we have Senator Audrey Gibson with us today. She's committed to bringing these river communities together, creating a great Florida riverway for everyone. Senator Gibson, thank you for joining us. What would you suggest are some of the ways to assure all citizens benefit from restoration of the Great Florida Riverway?
Well, thank you so much for having me. And it is so important that we reconnect these waterways for our entire community. Let me tell you, I remember as a young girl going to Silver Springs and riding in the glass bottom boats. And that's what I want to be experienced by our young people and our seniors today. And we have an opportunity through the Great Riverway to make this happen. We can invite and make sure that people of all backgrounds, all ethnicities get to enjoy fishing, get to enjoy learning how to be safe on the waters, learning about nature and enjoying nature and activities on that waterway in the way it was meant to be, as a natural flowing waterway.
Senator Gibson, that sounds fantastic. What do healthy waters mean to Northeast Florida's economy?
Well, we know that clean waterways and the fishing industry, commercial and recreational, are big economic engines for North Florida. And why would we not want to ensure our economic future by embracing this project to make sure that those waters are pristine, enjoyable, and the commercial fishing happens, recreational fishing happens, and even better fishing happens because we put back what was naturally flowing.
Senator Gibson, thank you for that, and thank you so much for your support of the Great Florida Riverway.
Thank you.
Great insights from Senator Audrey Gibson. You know, I especially like the comments about the importance of citizen engagement. There are many projects that citizens, nonprofits, and local governments have done to get people involved in this great riverway. Shannon, you were sharing with me a success story earlier about a key leader from Palatka. Sam Carr, president of the Bartram Trail Society of Florida and chair of the Putnam County's Waterways and Trails Committee.
Yes, in Putnam County, Sam Carr, the city, and the county have come together to revitalize the city's waterfront and river tourism. Through the St. Johns River Center, Bartram Trail signage, and the annual Bartram Frolic, the history of William Bartram and the deep legacy of the St. Johns River are being spotlighted. It shows what communities in the Great Florida Riverway can do together.
So, I think it's time for us to get a glimpse of the Great Florida Riverway. We're going to take a trip down that riverway from Apopka to the Atlantic, starting with Lake Apopka and following the river systems north-northeast, ending in Jacksonville and the Atlantic Ocean. But before that journey, let's hear from Commissioner Sean Parks from Lake County, near the starting point of the Great Florida Riverway. Across the state, more and more communities and their leaders are coming to understand the value of this riverway and what it will have. Commissioner Parks is actively encouraging other government leaders to promote the restoration of the Ocklawaha.
I'm so excited about the opportunity to promote the Great Florida Riverway. I just think about all the opportunities from Lake Apopka all the way up to the Atlantic Ocean, bird watching, recreation, fishing, paddling, boating, all those wonderful activities that we as Floridians know and love about Florida. and also thinking about the ecological restoration and making sure that that's preserved for the next generation. This is what really excites me, and I hope that you will join me in promoting the Great Florida Riverway. And it's time for leaders to step up and promote restoration of the Ocklawaha Basin.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Parks. What a great view of one of those beautiful Harris chain of lakes. And who knew that the flow emerges from the Green Swamp in Lake Apopka?
Lake Apopka is part of the headwaters of the Ocklawaha River. The water in Lake Apopka flows north through the AB Canal into the Harris chain of lakes and continues to flow north up into the Ocklawaha River, which eventually joins with the St. Johns River. And all of this water flows north out into the Atlantic Ocean near Jacksonville.
The Ocklawaha River emerges from the Green Swamp in Lake Apopka, slowly flowing into the Harris chain of lakes. This section of the Ocklawaha sits upstream of several structures, including the Moss Bluff Lock and Dam, and provides less than 14% of the Ocklawaha River's water. Approximately 66% of the Ocklawaha's water comes from Silver Springs, a group of 25 springs. A free-flowing Ocklawaha River is critical to restoring this famous spring system and state park. Silver Springs State Park, famous for its glass-bottomed boats, attracts hikers, kayakers, stand-up paddlers, and sightseers. Although it still reflects beauty and the real Florida, it could be brought back to its glory days.
Silver River is different than just about any place in the world. I've been to about 35 countries and I filmed all over. I come back home and find out my backyard is about as exotic as it gets. One, we have animals here from the Pleistocene swimming up and down the river. We also have a unique collection of springs in one place. There are very few places where you have 13, 14, 15 springs and several of the first magnitude. That means over 1 million gallons an hour coming out, just a huge quantity of water coming out of these springs. Well, I've been on this river since I was a little kid, and it has definitely changed. For people who've just come here and ride a kayak, they think everything's perfect. But there's a lot wrong here. A lot of species that should not be here, and quite a few that should be here. We're missing striped bass, we're missing a number of other species, and a lot of other birds that used to come here. So a lot of things are gone now, and partly because of the Rodman Dam. So it's time just to complete the whole system, to make it all work as one big piece.
Next, the Silver River intersects the darker waters of the Ocklawaha. The Ocklawaha River moves north as part of the Ocklawaha River Aquatic Preserve, the natural section of this magnificent river. Plants and trees are diverse, wildlife is plentiful, and due to the swifter, cooler river, aquatic weeds stay in check. There is no other river in America quite like the original Ocklawaha. Along the way, you encounter many of the historic steamboat landings, Colby, Connor, Gores, and many more. Eureka, the second largest of the paddleboat stops for Colonel Hubbard Hart, was the birthplace of Captain Erica Ritter. As a young child, Ritter saw the crusher crawler machine destroy part of the large cypress forest near her river home.
Growing up as a child on the river, I didn't have a boat, so I grew up on the banks. And we loved to take walks to the river. We always did that every day, got our chores done and took a walk. So the Cross Florida Barge Canal was a very large impact to our family, and we walked down to see what the latest destruction was. My mom cried on a stump that they cut down of a huge cypress tree. Without a boat growing up as teenagers, and even before we were like 10, 12 years old, we would go to the boat ramps at Eureka, the old ones that were still operating right on the river, and help people put their boats in, try to see if we could get a ride further up the river with our inner tubes to be dropped out to be floating down. Their also favorite thing was to be there when the fishermen came back and see what they caught and ask what they caught. So most people were out fishing for the panfish, the sunfish family, and bluegills and shellcrackers and redbreasts, some speckled perch fishing, which I was not aware of when growing up. When one fish I became aware of at a very young age that I didn't know existed in the river was the Atlantic striped bass.
Across the river at Eureka East, you will find the remnant pilings of the Cross Florida Barge Canal, as well as the Eureka Spillway and Dam, which was never operated. Jay Bailey, a Marion County native, reflects on the history and culture of the area.
Early in the 19th century, the Silver and Ocklawaha Rivers provided a magical steamboat route between Putnam and Marion County. Tourists began and ended their stays at beautiful hotels in both Ocala and Palatka. Other steamboats ventured even further up the Ocklawaha and now what's known as the Harris Chain of Lakes. Writers such as Modrican and Rollins, Sidney Lanier, and poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge wrote vividly about these waterways. In fact, Lanier described the river as one of the sweetest water lanes in the world. Artists still capture the beauty through photographs, music, poetry, and so much more.
Eureka is the start of the impounded river, the point where visitors can visibly begin to see the significant impacts from the dam. The tree diversity diminishes, the banks disappear behind the high waters, wildlife sightings are fewer, flow slows, and tours are often blocked by a river clogged with massive invasive aquatic plant islands. 20 springs have been drowned from the waters behind the dam.
I have been a bass fisherman my entire life. Not just a bass fisherman, a competitive tournament bass fisherman. I have fished on Rodman Reservoir many times. I've won tournaments there. I've won big fish in tournaments there. Rodman is an amazing bass fishery, and arguably one of the top bass fisheries in the entire Southeast. I love fishing at Rodman. But then one day, Margaret Tolbert was going to be presenting a film at Okamic called The Lost Springs. And that film showed me these amazing springs which are lost when the water is up in the dam. Many of them, natural beauty. And that film started me wondering about the cost of being able to fish at Rodman. And then Margaret invited my wife and I to spend a day with some other folks on Rodman, actually the day before the drawdown was to come back up. And we went around Rodman following the Ocklawaha. We went through all those stump fields that I used to fish. They were underwater then. And we went all the way up the Ocklawaha, and we stopped at some of those lost springs. They were beautiful. And I found myself sad that each one of these things, a thing of beauty, would within a week's time be gone for a very long time and not available for people to enjoy. What a shame. That did it for me. I formerly supported retaining Rodman. But then I became not just a supporter, but a strong supporter of restoring the Ocklawaha. It seems to me that the cost of retaining Rodman is very much too high.
It's going to be difficult for fishermen because we all loved Rodman. I was there when it first opened. It was a who's who of fishermen. Some of the greatest fishermen in the United States all flocked there. So I understand the pain of losing this, but the whole river system is not just one place. The Rodman fishery has gone down. It's not what it was when you and I started fishing there years ago, and today it's a whole different fishery. It's time we're going to have sludge building up. We've got a lot of weeds that are getting sprayed and hosed down and they're laying on the bottom. The long term is not good for Rodman. So I feel sorry for the folks who've grown up there, lived there, built their houses near it, but you really have to take that into consideration and change what we're doing now somehow.
Past historic Payne's Landing, Orange Springs, and Kenwood, you enter the Rodman Pool. The relic Cross Florida Barge Canal is your only choice to get to the St. Johns River off of this reservoir. You must navigate the stumps and floating logs, remnants of the river destruction 50 years ago, and then make it through the Buckman Lock to the St. Johns. By breaching the dam, boaters will be able to complete their journey downstream via the lower Ocklawaha River, a beautiful, winding waterway that continues to the confluence of the St. Johns, near Willaca, and on to the Atlantic Ocean.
We have thoroughly come to love where we live. We have a small resort here called Willaca Lodge, and we have guests that come from all over. And a lot of our guests will bring their boats with them. They like to explore the river, they like to fish the river, ski the river. But one thing they don't do is go through the barge canal. I have never had one guest come to say, oh, I can't wait to go to the Rodman Pool. They don't want to go up the river that far. They don't want to have to wait for a lock. They don't want to get inside the locks and have to wait for the lock to open up to get them out. They don't want to have to navigate all the tree stumps and lose the rear end of their expensive boats. And this is the general consensus of all my guests and all the people that I know in this area. There are people that are proponents of keeping the dam because they like the water source, they like the fishing. Well, guess what? We're not lacking for water here, folks. The whole river is here. There's more lakes in this area. There's no need to hold back water from the Ocklawaha. What we need to do is be able to get in our boat, go up the Ocklawaha, which is just right over there by channel marker 52, take a hard right and go all the way to the Silver River. Go to Silver Springs. I've been wanting to do that since I moved here, but it can't be done with the dam.
As you travel north past Willaca, you come to the St. Johns River waterfront, featuring the city dock, beautiful clock tower, St. Johns River Center, and downtown murals. This area has recently been transformed. From Willaca to the Atlantic Ocean resides a productive 100-mile estuary, supporting a thriving sports fishery and commercial shellfish industry. Shrimping abounds. Estuary anglers know that a healthy and sustainable fishery depends on the right balance of fresh and salt water. The estuary could suffer the same impacts we've seen to oysters in Apalachicola Bay due to upstream blockages, water withdrawals, and nutrient overload. This productive estuary ends at the Atlantic Ocean near Jacksonville, the beginning of the migratory pathway to Silver Springs.
So a free-flowing Ocklawaha will create so many new recreational opportunities. Not only will it improve water quality, but it creates new spaces for people to go explore, either by kayak or powerboat, to take photos, to bird watch, more wildlife viewing, manatee watching. And so it provides so many opportunities along the Ocklawaha and the free-flowing springs that will be recovered, but also downstream, because water quality will be improved with the restoration of more than 15,000 acres of forest and floodplain.
With reconnection of the Ocklawaha, the estuary will be renourished by the addition of 150 million gallons a day of natural flow and the cleansing power of 15,000 acres of restored floodplain forest.
So that's the Great Florida Riverway, 217 miles from Lake Apopka to the Atlantic Ocean. Along the way, it's connected to Silver Springs and many tributaries, including Orange Creek, Deep Creek near the Rodman Dam, Dunn's, Rice, Black, and Julington Creeks, as well as Doctor's Lake, which borders Duval and Clay counties. Senator Tom Wright understands the statewide benefits of reconnecting this three-river system.
I want to start by thanking you all for allowing me to speak on this important project and cover some of the budget items and policies the Senate set into motion this past session. Our 2020-2021 state budget provides record levels of funding to protect and restore one of our most valuable assets, the Florida environment. This past legislative session, we passed comprehensive and transformative policy that addresses pollution sources, water quality, and infrastructure. To further advance the efforts made in water quality and protection, the legislature invested a remarkable $690 million this year. And through a $100 million investment in the Florida Forever program, the Senate is proud to conserve and acquire strategic lands that will help preserve the environment and protect our infrastructure. During the 2020 legislative session, we made it our priority to take meaningful action to protect and preserve Florida's environment and address the most serious causes of pollution in our state. The Florida Senate commitment to improving water quality led the way to passing the Clean Waterways Act, which transforms policy regarding septic tanks, biosolids, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure, and agriculture. Protecting our environment against harmful spills is critical to preserving our water quality and health. By passing environmental enforcement legislation, we will prevent further illegal spills and hold those accountable who break our laws and damage our environment. Additionally, we made great strides in preserving wildlife and their ecosystems while also protecting the rights of Floridians to hunt and fish. I'm confident that the Florida Senate will continue to protect Florida's unique natural environment and the quality of life we as Floridians enjoy for generations to come. The Great Florida Riverway is one of Florida's environmental and economic treasures. Its restoration will attract more federal funding, create new jobs, boost the Northeast Florida economy, increase migratory fish populations, and allow our manatees to flourish. Aside from those benefits, the economic impact of this project struck out to me, as visitor numbers will greatly increase as much as 26%. And also the benefit cost ratio for the project is 1.76, meaning that $1.76 in net benefits is generated for every $1 of investment. And that represents an annual average rate of return on investment of 7.6%. So in closing, again, I'd like to thank you for having me. I look forward to furthering our efforts to protect natural resources in the coming 2021 session. Thank you very much.
So, as we've seen, this is not merely a local issue around the Rodman Pool. The Great Florida Riverway is for everyone. The impact of the Great Florida Riverway reaches into communities throughout Central and Northeast Florida. The people connections are just as important as the river connections.
Just like this vast river system, there are so many communities which stand to benefit directly and indirectly from the Great Florida Riverway.
Well, it's like a giant spider web, all naturally connected, except for the Rodman Dam. It's hard to imagine how this might change if the dam is breached and Ocklawaha again flows freely. Or is it? Every 3 to 5 years, the Marjorie Harris Carr Greenway staff arrange for a drawdown of the Rodman Pool. Now, when that happens, water levels somewhat mimic what restoration would look like. You don't get the benefit of migratory fish, manatees, or free navigation of the river, but you do see some of what would happen with a free-flowing Ocklawaha.
Every 3 to 4 years, a magical thing occurs along the Ocklawaha River in Florida. Between the river towns of Palatka and Eureka, the water level has dropped down behind the Rodman Dam to cleanse the impounded river. The river comes to life, looking more like the real Ocklawaha. Sandy banks and great cypress tree trunks reveal themselves. Some of the 20 flooded springs show their original glory, like Marion Blue and Cannon. Trees and plants respond to the natural water levels. riverbank and boat anglers come en masse. A variety of birds flock to the area. Outdoor enthusiasts return to the renewed and historic waterway. The Ocklawaha, a magical river for all.
And in addition to that magic, during a trying economic time, the drawdown had other positive impacts. This year, for instance, it drew 80% more visitors to reservoir access points compared to the same period during the previous 2 years. That created an economic benefit for the region, according to statistics from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission. A lot more of those big lunker bass are caught during those drawdown years.
But that magic is fleeting. When the waters were elevated again months after the drawdown, banks where anglers had fished were flooded, 20 springs were again drowned, and the baby trees that had begun to re-sprout were resubmerged.
When you see, right during the drawdown, you see all of this life burgeoning forth. It's like electrifying in the space of days or weeks. The banks are covered with green growth and plants, and the underwater submerged aquatic vegetation starts to almost bloom because it gets more light. And so it's like the light gives life to all of this. It's been sleeping forever on the bottom. And then everything is just burgeoning with life, and there's tons and tons of birds and it seems like you notice more fish, but so many kinds of birds are there. It just feels like a Garden of Eden. And some of the things that happen are that you see this myriad of thousands or whatever, perhaps millions of these seedlings coming up off these bare slopes that are kind of covered with mud generally or underwater. And then the water starts to come up. And every day you might go out and see these seedlings, and the water gets higher and higher, and pretty soon they're underwater. And you feel like there's nothing you can do. They're lost into the darkness. And it's very, very, I would say it's extremely depressing. It's sad. It's like a wake. It's a very sad time.
After the drawdown, the invasive aquatic plants that were flushed out of the system quickly return to restrict river navigation and boat ramps until they are sprayed with powerful herbicides. The cycle is repeated over and over. It is bad for business, bad for fishing, and bad for water quality. A cooler, swifter, free-flowing Ocklawaha could reduce this ongoing issue.
I'm Karen Chadwick, Captain Karen Chadwick with North Star Charters, and I'm a Florida native, and I run tours on north central Florida waterways, including the Ocklawaha River. And because of the Rodman-Kirkpatrick Dam, the floodwaters create blockages that allow excessive aquatic vegetation, floating aquatic vegetation like water lettuce and water hyacinths to grow in excess. And the winds push the plants into the Kenwood and Orange Springs boat ramps, and can block the whole barge canal. And there's times where you come out and there's a blockage and you just can't even get through the river at all. It's not navigable. You can't use the boat ramps, sometimes for months on end. They use a lot of herbicides to clear them out, and it can just blow back in and block up again the next day. And that makes Rodman Reservoir an unreliable recreational resource because of these constant aquatic vegetation blockages caused by the floodwaters from the dam.
If we free the Ocklawaha permanently by breaching the dam, we would see the magic of the drawdown and so much more.
Since the barge canal was halted 50 years ago, Silver Springs, the Ocklawaha, and the St. Johns Rivers have been the focus of so many scientific studies, including more than one massive environmental impact study. Now, overwhelmingly, scientists have lined up on the side of restoration. And if you don't believe us, check this out. These studies conclude that the dam should be breached, and these studies document the value of a free-flowing Ocklawaha River and what that will have for the economy, fish and wildlife, water quality, spring flow, estuaries, and forests.
Now, I'm sure you don't have time to review all of these, so we've condensed it for you. Here are 6 great reasons to free the Ocklawaha, shared by scientists and manatee experts.
By reestablishing that free-flowing river condition, what's going to happen is we're actually going to have more flow in the river. The dam actually serves as a net loss of water from the Ocklawaha River. Take the dam out, or a portion of it out, and what are we going to see? We'll see that pool of water go back into the channel. The surface area of water will reduce. The water loss to the atmosphere will reduce. Spring flow from below the river now will come back. We think from the calculations that have been done, it's been demonstrated through scientific investigations, that the flow of the Ocklawaha River will probably increase on the order of 150 million gallons per day. And it's going to bring back 20 or more springs that are underneath the reservoir today that will begin flowing again. So we'll have more springs to enjoy and celebrate.
So we're talking about improving the condition of 4 different ecosystems, each one of them having great regional significance, even to an extent global significance. Early on, some of the work that was done at the district while I was Director of Environmental Sciences did give us some concern that there would be impacts due to enrichment with nitrogen in the estuary. But subsequent work over the last 10 or more years, including some very sophisticated modeling work, has shown that the water quality effects would be minimal, negligible in fact. You weigh that against the lift in terms of species diversity and abundance of fish and invertebrates, and clearly I think the scales tipped in favor of doing the restoration. For example, Silver Springs is a first magnitude spring and indeed one of the largest flowing freshwater springs in the world. So that's not a small deal. The St. Johns River is an important estuary for the entire east coast of the United States. For example, the southernmost population of the American shad occurs in the St. Johns River and nowhere else. So the American shad, American eel, other species that migrate between the ocean and the fresh waters historically use the St. Johns River.
We're standing here on the banks of the St. Johns River. The river itself runs 310 miles through the heart of Florida, if you would, flowing right through downtown Jacksonville. This stretch of the river is the estuary. It's where the ocean meets the river, and this is one of the most fertile parts of the river. It's also sort of the last stop as you come up the 310-mile length of the river before the river sort of snakes through Jacksonville and finally ends up emptying into the Atlantic Ocean. Having a healthy ecosystem is paramount to having a healthy economy. And we started looking at the way we have used and abused the St. Johns River for years. The damming of the Ocklawaha is sort of an example of that. By reducing the flow of water into the St. Johns River, we allowed more salt water to come in. Effectively, just east of Jacksonville is an unlimited amount of salt water. And so when you change the flow characteristics of the river, either by stopping water flow through a dam, dredging, changing discharge characteristics by paving over areas, you change the migratory patterns of fish. You change the ecology of the ecosystem. We have watched the salinity of the St. Johns River sort of go deeper and deeper into the river over the years. We've watched all the submerged aquatic vegetation, which is critical to the nursery ground of the estuary, disappear in Duval County. There are no grass beds left in Duval County. And so trying to reestablish some sort of healthy ecosystem is critical as we continue to do development and dredge and pave over areas and fill in wetlands. We need to try to do our best job to restore and mitigate that impact as best we can.
So the St. John's is really unique in that's one of the few rivers in the world that is primarily fed by spring discharge. So we have a lot of spring water coming out of places like Silver Springs, Wakaiwa Springs, that add spring water into the river. And the Ocklawaha is a spring-dominated tributary. So the Silver River provides a lot of discharge to the Ocklawaha. So that water is being held back by the Rodman. And beyond that, there's a natural timing to river systems discharging to the St. John's. When it rains, it can flood. That flood water goes into the river system and goes into the St. John's River. The dam changes that natural flow characteristic. So there's not a natural sort of flux of water out of the Ocklawaha into the St. John's. And that can be critical at times of drought. If the water is not coming out of the Ocklawaha, it's not providing water to the St. John's. And I think that's one of the biggest problems we have with this system, is it isn't behaving like a regular river system would. It's behaving like a managed system that it is.
So with reconnecting Silver Springs to the St. John's River and to the Atlantic Ocean, those migratory animals will return. And those not only include mullet and channel catfish, that also includes striped bass, which really relied on the Ocklawaha River and the Silver River as a place for breeding and propagation in the past. Spring-fed rivers are essential for the existence of manatees in and around the Florida Peninsula. And they provide irreplaceable habitat for wintering during cold weather because of the need for a warm water refuge by these manatees.
Restoring natural habitat like the Ocklawaha River and its natural historic springs is critically important for the Florida manatee. Manatees can actually not survive in water colder than 68 degrees for prolonged periods of time. Or they can suffer a life-threatening condition called cold stress syndrome if they don't find these warm water sources in time. Due to loss and degradation of natural habitat, 60% of Florida manatees actually now rely on artificial warm water sources during the winter time, such as power plant effluents. And this is unsustainable for the future of the species.
Restoring the Ocklawaha by breaching the dam will benefit wildlife. Species like the Florida black bear, Florida panther, bobcat, wild turkey, and white-tailed deer will have new territory to roam in the corridor between the Osceola and Ocala National Forests. Healthier forests will benefit native birds like the bald eagle, osprey, and wood duck. Fish and other aquatic species will migrate through an open river and access the Ocklawaha's springs.
So the Florida Wildlife Corridor is an attempt to make all Floridians and other people across the globe aware that we still have this opportunity to protect a functionally connected system of wildlife corridors across the state of Florida. So if we restore the river and put back the floodplain forest that used to characterize the area that now where Rodman sits, that it will be a much more functional wildlife corridor than it is today.
When people think about the Ocklawaha River Restoration Project, they often focus on just the river and not the greater ecosystem. Behind us is Little Orange Creek Preserve and Nature Park. This is more than 3,000 acres of conservation lands put together in a partnership with nonprofit organizations and government agencies, including counties and cities, to protect this incredible system. The Ocklawaha River Restoration Area is a critical link in the Ocala to Osceola National Forest, or O2O corridor.
Wow, those are some impressive environmental benefits. Let's see. 150 million gallons a day of natural water flow to nourish the lower Ocklawaha and St. John's rivers, 20 lost springs uncovered along the Ocklawaha, migratory fish and shellfish returning, including the fish once seen under Silver Springs glass-bottom boats, 500 plus manatees, 15,000 acres of floodplain forest restored, a strengthened wildlife corridor connecting the Ocala and Osceola National Forests, and an east-west corridor towards Alachua County. And speaking about Alachua County, one of Alachua County's newest commissioners, Mary Alford, recently talked to us about why restoring the Ocklawaha River is important to Alachua Countyans and all Floridians.
Well, gosh, you know, I grew up here in Alachua County and I'm an environmental engineer, and water is something that I think about a lot. And I like to think of water as the great unifier. You know, water doesn't know any boundaries. We share water across the boundaries of countries, across the boundaries of states. We share water across the boundaries of our counties. And so even though it's hard to see any connection between the Ocklawaha and Alachua County, it's there. It's there in the Great Florida Aquifer that provides wonderful drinking water to the entire state of Florida. And, you know, that aquifer was shaped and developed by the historic river system that we've done lots of damage to in the past that we can't fix. But we have an opportunity here with one thing we can fix, and I would love to see us take that path.
And like Commissioner Alford shares, water sees no county lines. That's why it's important to share the science that shows the deep connection of these three rivers and the Atlantic Ocean.
And Greg, equally as strong as the environmental benefits are the economic benefits. University of Florida economists, active and retired, have produced some impressive reports since 2017. Over the last 4 years, UF economist Alan Hodges has been engaged in economic studies related to the restoration of the Ocklawaha River. He recently completed a new economic assessment of the economic benefits of Ocklawaha restoration, and the results are compelling.
We are at a defining moment in the future of the Great Florida Riverway, the Ocklawaha, Silver Springs, and the Lower St. Johns River. Restoration of the Ocklawaha River, the heart of this Great Florida Riverway, is a river restoration project of national significance. It will create an economic lift to central and northeast Florida, increasing tourism and providing jobs. The timing is right to capitalize on the rapidly growing outdoor recreation market, benefiting river communities up and down this 217-mile system, from Lake Apopka to Jacksonville. It is critically important to communities such as Palatka and Silver Springs, communities showing signs of economic distress.
Silver Springs community is now considered a blighted area. Between Palatka and Silver Springs were the two primary tourist attractions for Florida in the 50s and 60s. That was it. That is no more. There's just been lost opportunities for us to create sustainable fishery and to reconnect with the wildlife habitats and advance recreational improvements.
University of Florida economists have confirmed that restoring the Great Florida Riverway, a three-river system with 50-plus springs, would provide a solid return on investment. University of Florida economist emeritus Alan Hodges projects that regional visitation could increase by 28% after restoration due to the diversity of recreational opportunities available for everyone. So many new ways to enjoy the river. 7,500 acres opened up for camping, hiking, biking, horseback riding, and hunting. Natural riverbanks reemerge for shoreline fishing, and an unobstructed paddling trail is created. The recent drawdown simulated what restoration would look like. The giant cypress trees or sequoias of the south are accessible. Springs reemerge, fishing flourishes, and birds come in mass.
During the recent drawdown of the Rodman Reservoir, which happens every 3 years, we noticed around an 80% increase in visitation at the Rodman Reservoir access points. So we think that's evidence that there is a strong pent-up demand for recreational use of the lower Ocklawaha River. That's good evidence that a restoration would result in an overall increase in recreational use.
When 20 springs are uncovered from the weight of the water from the Rodman Dam, manatee watching, boating, snorkeling, and swimming will increase. Based on research of other smaller spring recreation areas, University of Florida economist Steve Holland estimated that by uncovering just Cannon and Marion Blue Springs, 2 of the 20 lost springs, and providing supporting recreation facilities, the area could bring in a projected 30,000 new visitors and $3 million annually. Blue Spring State Park, Crystal River, Gilchrist, and others have experienced that kind of visitor success.
Blue Spring is a highly visited park all year long. During manatee season, we experience over 229,000 visitors. There was a recent economics impact study done, and what it found was 80% of the people who visit Blue Spring said they will come back to visit again. Now that study was done during manatee season, so imagine those people that were here to see the manatees and they're coming back to see the manatees again.
World-famous Silver Springs could become one of the best manatee viewing locations in the state.
Now is receiving about 300 to 400,000 visitors a year. I expect that the visitation and the effect on the economy would be enormous, because with manatees in the Silver River on a regular basis in large numbers, I expect we'd have over 1 million visitors a year to Silver Springs and the Silver River. There'd be no other place in the interior of the state where you could go see so many manatees.
In addition to manatees, other wildlife viewing and birding would increase with the restoration. Who would know better about the impacts of birding than Audubon, Florida?
Birding is by far the largest segment of the wildlife viewing industry in Florida. And the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission recently estimated that this is a $6 billion industry in Florida. Restoring the Ocklawaha River will bring back the birds. A little extra planning and marketing will bring in the birders, and will bring additional revenues to the interior of Florida that are much needed.
An unobstructed fish migration path will bring back historic fish, such as the sought-after striped bass, 2 times bigger than largemouth bass, and American shad, mullet, and channel and white catfish, and many more species. Additional downstream flow to the St. Johns River is expected to improve the salinity balance, water quality, and submerged aquatic vegetation, helping sustain the lower St. Johns fishery and commercial shellfish operations, vital to the economy. All these benefits add up to a positive return on investment.
It works out to about a 1.76 benefit cost ratio. So in other words, for every dollar of investment, we're going to get $1.76 of benefit. That represents about a 7.5% rate of return on investment. Most public works projects, like Everglades restoration, for example, have a rate of return on investment of somewhere less than 5%, typically 3 to 5%.
Increased tourism generates greater business revenues than spending in related industries, job creation, and a rise in household incomes. The regional impact of partial restoration, reaching the earthen dam on one side, is expected to be $8.1 million in annual economic output once restoration is completed, or a $50 million net benefit over 10 years.
The numbers of the people using that reservoir have gone down. So whether you're for or against the reservoir and the dam being there, your concern should be, are we getting our money's worth out of this thing? In other words, are there recreational assets that we could have that would benefit Putnam County?
Economist Alan Hodges projects that keeping the status quo, retaining the dam, is projected to result in a cumulative loss of $5.3 million over 10 years. The Rodman Dam and the Buckman Locks do not provide water supply, power generation, or flood protection. Only an artificial fishing reservoir that is losing users and requires ongoing maintenance. Bassmasters has again dropped the ranking of the Rodman Pool, now to 8th best bass lake in the southeast, while the St. Johns River within 50 miles of Palatka has climbed to 4th. More than 50 years ago, the dam was projected to last 50 years. In recent years, several dams across the nation of similar age and structure have collapsed. Meanwhile, the aging dam and locks will cost $4 million just to conduct the backlog of repairs and nearly $1.5 million annually for maintenance. Pouring millions of Florida taxpayer dollars into repairing and maintaining a dam past its designed life expectancy does not make economic sense.
There are a few other projects in Florida that offer the combination of ecological and environmental benefits that this project does. The land in question is owned by the state. We have a plan. We've gone through an environmental impact statement. So this is one of the most shovel-ready and stimulus funding-ready projects that we have in Florida. This project would create immediate jobs in Putnam and Merriam counties in the construction industry and open up new jobs in recreation and hospitality industries over the years as the restoration proceeds.
These are compelling economic metrics defining the opportunities and returns of the Great Florida Riverway.
Now, for us non-economists, that is a big bang for the buck. $1.76 for every dollar invested, and the potential for 28% increased visitation. Now that is huge.
Aging infrastructure across America has made dam safety a national concern. Over the last 20 years in communities across the nation, 1,200 dams have been removed, or for more than just safety reasons, but to see the return of migratory fish and to improve water quality. We now have living proof of what happens when dams are removed or breached and rivers are restored. Wildlife expands, and tourists and visitors spend more time and money in nearby communities.
And we stop wasting tax dollars repairing and maintaining obsolete and aging structures.
Greg and I want to thank you for joining us for this important program. But now it's your turn. If you didn't know about the Great Florida Riverways before this program, perhaps if you've never heard of the Ocklawaha River, if you didn't know the connection to Silver Springs, or if you weren't aware of how critical these connections are to the longest river in Florida, we ask you to share this program with your neighbors, with your family, with your friends. And further, we want you to visit thegreatfloridariverway.com and take action. Show your support for the Great Florida Riverway today. Where else can you find one project that can help restore 3 rivers, 50 springs, and river communities along the way? Let's do this, and thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us. Before we start the Q&A, Eugene has a very short presentation. Take it away, Eugene.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to start with a map that I think might encapsulate some of the things that you would take from the film. Really, I wanted to expand on this O-to-O connection, the Ocala National Forest that you see here at the southern end of this map, and the Osceola National Forest up there at the Florida-Georgia line. And of course, here's the Rodman Reservoir, and it really severs this primary natural connection, this corridor of connectivity of natural lands that we see between the Ocala and Osceola. I labeled several of the major Florida Forever projects within that corridor. And I also wanted to just expand a little bit on a plant perspective, since we are the Florida Native Plant Society. So I did a quick analysis using the Florida Natural Area Inventory's biodiversity matrix screening tool. This is anybody can try using. It's available to anybody on their website, fna.org. I don't expect you to be able to read this list. It's a list that was generated by using that matrix. I did a query that identified all the plants you see pictured here. These are all elements or species that the Florida Natural Areas Inventory tracks on the basis of rarity or imperilment. Not all of them are actually formally listed by either the state or the feds, but a great many of them are. And to just summarize the result of that query, I just looked at areas immediately north of and immediately south of the reservoir, trying to identify imperiled species for which that reservoir might really pose a barrier to north-south movement, especially with impending climate change and the need for some species to perhaps be able to migrate northward in response to climate change. Of the species that came up as potentially within those areas, 31 were plant species. There were a lot of animal species, a lot of very prominent ones. Obviously, the Florida black bear and red-cockaded woodpecker, Florida scrub jays, but there weren't nearly as many animals as plants. And among those 31 tracked plant species were at least 6 that I was able to determine with a little more investigation. They reached the northern limit of their documented range, according to Dick Wonderland, in Marion County. So for species like that, it may be especially critical that they have a corridor over which they can migrate towards the north. I did divide these species that you see pictured here according to that. The ones that you see on the left, the star anise, the scrub buckwheat, pinkroot, the grass of Parnassus, and pygmy pipes, they're all listed as endangered by the state of Florida, all 5 of them. And they are among those that the northern limit of their range is right there in Marion County, just on the south side of the reservoir. There's a 6th one in that same category that I wanted to highlight a little bit more, Weria plexifolia. This is a species that the society has been working hard to help recover. Some of you may be familiar with the project we have going, the Weria area, our first foray into actual land ownership, where we've preserved lands that are home to thousands of Weria. This is a species that's listed as endangered not only by the state, but also under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. Those are the only slides that I prepared for this, but I did want to put at least a little bit of a microscope, a little bit of a focus on plants, and also help paint that picture in your mind about that connectivity north to the Osceola National Forest, and really illustrate how that reservoir might be much more of a barrier to species movement north and south than a restored river and a natural floodplain forest would. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen and put you back in charge, Valerie.
Thank you so much for that, Gene. I am trying a new thing. I have the questions in little images. So we'll start with Ben's question. What other rivers in Florida need the kind of advocacy that you're doing for the Ocklawaha?
You want to start with that, Jim?
I can certainly respond to that. Sure. Well, when we talk about rivers, basically, the lion's share of the rivers in Florida are under stress from one particular source or another, either depletion of flow or impacted water quality. So lots and lots of rivers in Florida are stressed right now. However, the Ocklawaha is a little different than most of them because we don't really have a lot of dams on rivers in Florida for for obvious reasons, but they don't have much functionality in Florida compared to other parts of the country. So the Ocklawaha its problems are principally related to having a dam in place rather than just withdrawals, excessive withdrawals or pollution. In fact, pollution is not so much of a problem yet on the Ocklawaha, except for the pollution that we introduce with herbicides to control aquatic vegetation.
And I might add, there are a lot of stressed rivers in Florida, and some of them have received a lot of attention and efforts towards restoration, the Kissimmee River being an obvious example. But as Jim mentioned, that dam is really perhaps the thing that really distinguishes this from those other rivers, and the opportunity for restoration that can occur simply by removing the dam. I can't really think of any others, at least in peninsular Florida, where a dam is actually an impediment to natural species movements. So we have a number of fish species, and we have the West Indian manatee that used to have habitat on the Ocklawaha River all the way up to Silver Springs, and they no longer do. That habitat connection was severed by the dam. So that is another dimension that really distinguishes this from a lot of those other rivers.
Thank you both. And then he has a follow-up question. Are there other advocacy groups centered around rivers that we should be paying attention to?
Other advocacy groups. Well, indeed, there are lots of advocacy groups that are involved with river issues, and particularly this one itself on the Ocklawaha River. In fact, there is actually a coalition of organizations that have banded together, environmental nonprofits, just to address the issue on the Ocklawaha River. This was originally put together many years ago, but it was resurrected in around 2018 to address the Ocklawaha River. And we managed to get a small group of environmental nonprofits to sign a letter to Governor DeSantis before he took office, after he was elected in 2018, before he actually took office. That coalition now has expanded to about 40 or 45 environmental nonprofits all across Florida as it relates to the Ocklawaha River. But yes, rivers are a problem across the state, and we really need to be concerned about all of them now.
Yeah. And maybe just a quick shout out to the St. John's River Keepers, who are, if I'm not mistaken, Jim, they're really one of the prominent members of that coalition. And I think it reflects the fact that the St. John River Keepers have such a deep interest in the Ocklawaha restoration. It's because they understand and appreciate the implications of that dam and the reservoir and withholding all that flow. They understand and appreciate the implications that has for the health of the whole St. John's system.
Precisely, Gene. And the St. John's River Keeper has been a leader in this for a long time, going back quite a few years, decades actually, of that understanding that the Ocklawaha and the St. John's are essentially one flowing system, and that their connection is vitally important for a whole host of reasons, some of which we have only begun to realize more acutely just recently, in things having to do with climate change, sea level rise, the additional dredging of the harbor near Jacksonville, which is going to allow in more salt water from the ocean. All these things are making the arguments to restore the system by just breaching that dam and letting it free flow again, be a much more vital and resilient system.
And so to speak to, if you're interested in river advocacy, there's not just the St. John's River Keeper. There's river keepers throughout the state. they tend to be similarly ethical and well-run. And so Calusa Riverkeeper, I think there's a Little Miami Riverkeeper maybe. Yeah. Apalachicola. So
yeah,
this is really good organizations. And of course, the Surfrider foundations I've seen are getting a little bit more active on environmental issues. They kind of draw a little younger crowd, but there are organizations to look to and support as well. Debbie Meeks asks, how long will it take for the landscape to recover after being submerged? What might the succession of plants look like? And who owns the land currently submerged? This question was asked several times.
Okay, you want me to take that?
Please, Jim.
Okay. How long will it take for the landscape to recover after being submerged? Well, this is an often asked question. It's a good question. It's an important question. The fact is that we now know, because of dam removals that have been underway for decades now, that the recovery of the landscape and the riparian system in general, and the actual river itself, begins happening right away. There's no lag whatsoever. In fact, we know this specifically on the Ocklawaha River because the water levels behind the dam must be drawn down every 2 to 3 years to try to control undesirable aquatic vegetation in the warm and stagnant water behind the dam. And so what we see was when they draw the water levels down from their typically around 19 feet above sea level down to 11 feet above sea level. So now they're going down about 8 feet, or sometimes a little more. They actually surcharge the reservoir to 20 feet before they come down. We see native vegetation coming in within weeks after the water levels are down and the soils are emergent. And so it's a very, very quick response. Now, I don't want to give the impression that for a restoration program, that there shouldn't be proactive measures put in place and not just let nature do its own thing. This has been looked at very carefully. A number of scientists, some at the University of Florida, have looked at this. And so there are a lot of details that have been worked out. I'm not a botanist myself, but there are ways to go about this. And then at some point in time, after probably only about maybe 3 to 5 years, nature takes over, and we'll see probably a succession of different vegetation dominant on these emergent floodplains, ultimately progressing to what the native, cypress forests were and still are farther upstream on the river. So again, Mother Nature has a way of healing itself if we let her.
Yeah, I noticed in the film the couple scenes where they showed some of those areas during one of the drawdowns. It looked like a pretty thick carpet of young red maples that was coming in, and I would surmise that might be one of the pioneer species that you would see really become established. But as Jim says, I don't think it's a matter simply of just take out the dam, drain it, and then Mother Nature will fix it all alone. There's a lot that we could do to help direct that recovery, make it much more effective. Certainly, there would be the likelihood of some invasive non-native species that would take hold in there, and it would behoove us to maintain some control over that, just to facilitate recovery of the suite of native species that would be representative of that floodplain system before it was drowned by the dam.
So who owns the land currently submerged?
Well, I'll field that. And my quick answer is you do. We all do. Most of these lands adjacent to the Ocklawaha River are either owned by the state of Florida as part of what was originally going to be the Cross Florida Barge Canal project that got started so long ago, and ultimately when that project was terminated and deauthorized, the federal government and the state government worked together, and these lands that were procured for the Cross Florida Barge Canal project ultimately became the Marjorie Harris Carr Cross Florida Greenway. And so they're public lands. Some of it's owned by the state, some of it's owned by federal government. There's some hodgepodge private lands here and there, but by and large, the state and the federal government had cooperated to buy up all of those lands before the project was started, because those lands were going to be flooded.
If I'm not mistaken, also the portions that are federally owned by the, I guess, Department of the Interior, the Forest Service lands, if I'm not mistaken, hasn't the Forest Service for the last couple of decades been very supportive of restoration?
Right, Gene. U.S. Department of Agriculture, United States Forest Service has been consistently in support of restoring a free-flowing Ocklawaha River. And it was actually the Forest Service that took the lead on doing some of the environmental impact work after the state of Florida committed to the restoration in 1995, when Governor Lawton Chiles said to his state agencies, go forth and restore the Ocklawaha River. And then his agencies started on the permitting, and the permitting was basically complete by the late 1990s. And the Forest Service did some of the environmental impact work on that. And they went with the restoration plan in cooperation with the state, which was called the partial restoration alternative, which basically meant restore a free-flowing Ocklawaha River, but don't take out all of the facilities that were built because it's too much. It's a waste of money, and we don't need to do that. So, yeah, the Forest Service is supportive of this. They still are quietly, but they need a partner. And the lead on this really should be, and always should be, the state of Florida. And then we had that leadership in the mid 1990s. Unfortunately, something turned out in the St. Johns River. It was the emergence of these blue-green algae blooms, also called cyanobacteria, that were getting more and more intense in the late 1990s, just at the same time that the district was set to issue its permit to the state for restoring the Ocklawaha River. Well, at that time, we didn't know enough about the causes for these cyanobacteria blooms. We knew there would be nutrient releases associated with restoring the Ocklawaha River. So basically, the state of Florida and the Water Management District agreed to put the permit application on hold, or what is called in abeyance. And it's still there today, in abeyance. They don't need to issue a new permit application. There it is on the shelf, ready to go. And when those studies were done, very, very detailed studies were done in the 2000s. And by 2016, the Water Management District finally quietly issued a very detailed technical report that said, by golly, we can restore the Ocklawaha River to a free-flowing condition, because the dominant problem with the cyanobacteria is phosphates, and that's not going to be the dominant release. It's going to be nitrates coming out when it's restored. So we are poised with all the right information in place to move forward today, and hopefully we'll have the political leadership in place very soon.
You want to add to that, Gene?
I have nothing to add. That was a great answer, Jim. It's very encouraging to know that you talk about shovel-ready projects. This sounds like it's one. It just needs the state to step up and say, let's get it done.
And you know, we had 7 governors in a row, from Reuben Askew starting in 1971, all the way through Charlie Crist when he ended his term in 2011. All 7 of those governors over 40 years, all publicly supportive of restoration of the Ocklawaha River. But in recent times, we haven't quite had that level of enthusiasm up in the governor's mansion. And not because it isn't a good idea.
Thank you. Vanetta asks, it's been many, many years trying to remove the Rodman Dam and free the Ocklawaha. Do you see this ever happening? So we got some doubt here.
Well, I'll field that again, and I'll say with a lot of optimism that yes, I do see it happening. If we don't get it from the current governor, we're going to get it from a governor in the near future, because it just simply makes sense across the board, ecologically, economically. All the arguments are in favor of restoring the Ocklawaha River, including for communities that are nearby the river, who think, some of whom think that maybe it might adversely impact them, but they haven't really had taken the opportunity to look much closer at the economic opportunities that are poised to occur. So I think it's quite possible it's going to happen soon, and we might even see some moves by Governor DeSantis in the very near future to perhaps call for a permanent drawdown of the water level behind the Kirkpatrick Dam because of the recently identified much greater risk of a catastrophic failure. And that would be the perfect opportunity to move forward with restoration.
Well, and those constituencies that really would support retaining the reservoir, those that are linked to the fishing, the recreational fishing industry. I think it was alluded to in the film that the fishing isn't quite what it was, that a reservoir system like that is, it's not a naturally functioning kind of system that is going to sustain itself. And so over time, it's become just a shadow of what it once was. And even still, even when it was at its peak, I think there's a lot of other recreational development potential, a lot of other avenues by which those surrounding communities can benefit economically that would all argue in favor of restoration as
Absolutely.
a much longer term benefit.
Yes, and there's, I mean, besides the fact that it's an artificial environment, and it's also gotten to be, like a lot of dams, there's a lot of issues about holding water behind this particular dam. In particular, as I mentioned already, the herbicides are a bit of a problem, but there's something else that's a little bit hidden that most people don't understand, is that the bottom of the reservoir, where all this aquatic vegetation, dying and decaying vegetation is occurring and filling up the bottom, has become a sink, if you will, for the accumulation of mercury, toxic mercury. And mercury, as many people know, doesn't just stay where it is. It has a tendency to bioaccumulate up the food chain. So now, while people still like to fish behind the reservoir and even downstream of the reservoir to some extent, the levels of mercury in the fish that's most prized to catch, the largemouth bass, is too high for women of childbearing years and children to eat ever. And the advisory for men is no more than one fish per month because of the mercury. So these issues never existed before the dam was put in place. And so we can look to that clearing up also as we go back to a free-flowing system and it resumes its former hydrologic and chemical conditions.
And that confluence between the Ocklawaha and the St. John's. The St. John's side of that is pretty popular for fishing, pretty good for fishing. But one thing that we haven't really discussed, and I do want to make sure that's part of the discussion here. The Ocklawaha is the major tributary to St. John's River.
Indeed.
And the flow that it contributes now, is much less than it did historically because the dam retains all that flow in a reservoir and massive amounts of it are lost to evaporation. If you look at sea level rise projections, there's been a lot of suggestion that even with 1 meter of sea level rise, that would have the effect of converting a lot of the St. John's River to an estuarine system. Certainly a lot of the downstream segment already is, but that salt would intrude. I've seen suggestions, and Jim, you were with the St. John's Water Management District, you might know better than I, but even 1 meter of rise, given how flat that St. John's system is, the very little bit of slope that it has, those estuarine conditions, the impacts of the salt water could go as far upriver as Lake Monroe and Sanford.
Absolutely. The river channel of the St. John's River itself, the bottom, this is the actual bottom of the river, where you hit the mud or whatever is there, is below sea level all the way to Sanford. And that's why when we get these low pressure atmospheric conditions that are nearby in the Atlantic Ocean, we may see the St. John's River flowing backwards for sometimes days, and occasionally, even if they're persistent low pressures and the sea levels are up, for several weeks, the river flowing south towards Sanford and the lakes down there. Now, once you get past that chain of lakes, the channel is above sea level, but the storage that's available in those lakes can accommodate a lot of reverse flow, and it's sailing for sure. This is coming from the ocean. And so, yeah, these are big issues with sea level rise and climate change.
Taking out the dam, that increased river flow, it's not just in this river system, but rivers throughout the state. Restoring natural volumes of outflow is going to be one of our best defenses against saltwater intrusion.
Yeah, and so the combined effects of reduced evaporation and evapotranspiration off the impoundment behind the dam, along with the re-emergence of those 20 or more large springs along the Ocklawaha River, it's been estimated that the increase in flow of the Ocklawaha River may be on the order of 150 million gallons per day. Studies have looked at this.
Yeah. It's the list of reasons for restoration is long, and the reasons against very short.
Very short indeed. I won't say non-existent, but they're very short. Yeah.
So, Alan Bailey, this is my favorite question so far. The backstory to this is he's thinking about the Kissimmee River. They demolished the S65B lock and spillway at Bluff Hammock, and he believes that was a mistake because the remains of the structures should have had all the steel and other steel parts and machinery removed, and then filled into ground elevation, with the concrete parts left to be a monument of the result when humans go too far.
I did not hear that very well. It broke up, the audio. Gene, did you hear it?
I believe that it was suggested by the person asking the question that if restoration was to occur, that essentially the Kirkpatrick Dam should be left there as a kind of breached, but the structure left there as a monument to our
hubris.
Hubris, yes. Our belief that we could engineer nature at will.
Well, I don't know if I want to comment about monuments to foolishness, but I'll say this. We build dams for really only 4 different reasons. We can only justify dams economically for 4 different reasons. And most of those dams are built for water supply and power generation, particularly out in the Western United States. In the East, there's a few that are for flood control and navigation. And this particular dam was built for commercial navigation. That was its only purpose, commercial navigation. When the economic study was built or was done to look at whether this project could be actually funded with federal dollars, the cost benefit ratio was very slim, slightly positive. But I'll say this, that was done before the National Environmental Policy Act was on the books. And when NEPA came on the books, it said, oh, by the way, if federal funds are involved, you got to look at the environmental impacts and factor them into the justification for spending taxpayer money on a project. So the Corps did that. Took them a while to get around to it. They finally did it. And when they did that, they said, there's a loser project. It doesn't justify being built anymore. So here today, we have this project that has no economic benefits of any significance, and it still is costing the taxpayer money to maintain it. So it's an economic loser. It always was, even from the beginning. It did take a lawsuit by the defenders of the environment to push that button a long time ago, but the button's been pushed. We know what the answers are. It makes sense economically alone, even if it didn't ecologically, to take the dam out.
All right, that's great. So Karen, that's Karen's question. Why was the canal built in the first place? And why is it still there? Is it currently being used by anybody?
Well, it was built for commercial navigation across the Florida Peninsula, so that shipping coming down out of the Mississippi River and into the Gulf could make it up the Atlantic seaboard much quicker than if it had to go around the Florida Peninsula. So that was the justification for building a cross-Florida barge canal. And again, the economic arguments were pretty weak for that, but they were slightly positive prior to indicating, to factoring in the losses due to environmental damages. So that's what was built, commercial navigation. And it probably, even if it had been built, right? Even if Florida Defenders of the Environment had not been successful in its lawsuit to stop the project, it's likely that there'd be very little commercial navigation, just because there's been such a change since the 1960s when this was authorized. We got the entire federal national highways projects built, and interstate highways, and so much of this now is transported by overland traffic, and so it's highly unlikely it would even be functioning today, even if it had been built.
Yeah. Yesteryear's infrastructure.
Yeah, quite right. Old thinking for the 20th century.
There's still bits of the canal there, right? Can people go on them?
Say that again?
There's still bits of the canal left, like they did build some of the canal. So can people go on them, go in the water?
So there's one functioning canal segment that still exists, and it's the connection between the St. John's River at elevations that are close to sea level, going to the southeast and going to what's called the Buckman Lock, where you get the boats get raised up, and this is all just recreational boating now, up to the level of the reservoir, which tends to be around 18 feet. So you get in the lock, they float your boat, and then they open the gates up towards the impoundment side behind the dam, and then you move on out in there. This is all just recreational. And I'll have to tell you, a lot of this use now today is ironically during tournaments, because people don't usually use this very much. It's during fishing tournaments, bass fishing tournaments, that start actually upstream of the dam in the impoundment behind the dam in that some people call it a reservoir. Well, a lot of the fishermen realize they got a better chance to win a tournament by locking out of the reservoir or impoundment and heading to the St. John's River to catch your fish. Tournament rules basically say that once you're in the water, you can't come out of the water until you bring your fish back to where you put in. So they can lock out of the Ocklawaha River and travel down that lock all the way to St. John's River, catch their tournament winning fish, then lock back in at the end of the day. And a lot of the winners are coming from the St. John's River. So there's a lot of irony in that.
Indeed.
Quite something.
There is the English section of canal that it's not very long. I don't think there is. It ends at a dam where there is a little bit of hydroelectric electricity generation, I think. But
I think they took that down some time ago. There was, yeah.
There's no ability for boats to get from the canal into the lake on the other side.
Well, the Inglis Lock was conceived to be a portion of the Cross Florida Barge Canal, but it preceded the Cross Florida Barge Canal project by decades. It was a project that was built to allow phosphate mining near Dunellen to be able to barge that out to the west coast of Florida and then get on ships and transport it to markets from there. So that's what was the origin of that portion of what later became basically brought into the overall Cross Florida Barge Canal project, because portions of it were already in place. But yeah, it's that's still there. That's probably going to stay there. There isn't a really big push for restoring that part of the hydrologic system. And it would be much more complicated because there's an awful lot of private land and docks along the lake that's dammed up where it dams it up, and also along the canal itself. And so that would be really problematic politically.
Okay, now we have lots of questions from Athena. And she just asked about the Inglis Canal. She says, I think the reservoir with the canal and the canal by Inglis are the only two existing functioning remnants of the barge canal. Is that correct?
So basically the canal between the dam and the St. John's River is the only functioning part. There was another lock that was essentially completed in the Eureka area, and it's still there. You can look at Google Maps or Google Earth, and you can see that facility is still there. It's never operated. It was built and as part of the project, but the project was stopped by Florida Defenders of the Environment before the rest of the project got built. So that was never became functional. It could be functional, but there was no purpose to it because it's just the rest of the project wasn't built.
Okay, so we covered Athena's other question about who gets the property rights to the land between the new river and what used to be waterfront property. That is, it's public land for the most part. You said there are some exceptions.
Yeah, that's correct. It's in public ownership. I mean, they had to buy that land before they flooded it. All of that was a lot of that was private land that had to be bought out before the project could get started. So while this project was conceived in the 1930s and got started in the 1930s with 1 year of funding from the federal government, and then it was resurrected when Lyndon Johnson became president. John Kennedy campaigned in Florida in support of the Cross Florida Barge Canal, largely to get votes to win Florida. He did not successfully win the electoral college votes of Florida, but Lyndon Johnson, when he took over in 1963, late 63 and early 64, came out in support of the Cross Florida Barge Canal. And so hence it got built.
And then deauthorized by the next resident of the White House, Richard Nixon.
Well, yeah, deauthorized is not the right word. And I don't give Nixon any credit whatsoever. Some people do. I know some people who are Nixon fans, but you know, it was Florida Defenders of the Environment's lawsuit that stopped the project in 1971. All Richard Nixon did as the commander-in-chief of the United States Armed Forces is send the message to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to stop work on the project because the injunction had already been issued. So you can ring President Nixon's bells if you want to on that, but he was only responding to the injunction of the judge that came out of FDE's successful lawsuit against the Corps of Engineers.
I did not know that. Thanks.
Yeah, and the actual deauthorization of the project took another 20 years. And so that was a lot of work, but there were lots of Florida heroes involved in this. Buddy McKay was a hero. Bob Graham was a big hero in getting it deauthorized. And both of these guys in Washington, D.C. in their capacity there as elected officials and as elected officials in Florida. And Bob ultimately, when he was in the Senate, United States Senate, in shepherding this through the authorization process. And by the way, Florida Defenders of the Environment just recently awarded the Marjorie Harris Carr Award for environmental advocacy to Bob Graham, who is still alive and well, just last January, principally for his role in stopping and deauthorizing the Cross Florida Barge Canal. He had to take the award at where he lives at Oak Hammock because of the COVID pandemic, and we couldn't have a live in-person event, so we did it on Zoom and recorded it to YouTube. And so it wasn't as fun as some of our previous Carr Award events.
All right. Athena would like to know, when is the next drawdown?
Okay, so the last drawdown was 2019, 2020, if I recall correctly. And the next one is likely to be 2 to 3 years after that. They tend to vary. So, you know, you would, if it was 2019, you'd expect 20, 21, 22 possibly, or somewhere in that range for the next one, every 2 to 3 years. And they take about 6 to 8 months. They get started in October, and they're not done until basically May.
Thank you.
And by the way, when they close the gates to refill the reservoir, and that happens in the spring. And when the temperatures are warming, the flow in the Ocklawaha River below the dam goes to nothing. And that is extremely stressful on aquatic systems below the dam. One thing is the decrease in oxygen levels in the water. You got two things going here. One is the temperatures are warming up, so there's less oxygen dissolved in the water to begin with. And one of the ways, the principal ways that oxygen gets into rivers and lakes is by wind shear of atmospheric air moving over the water. That's how the oxygen gets in there. And those things aren't adequate to get enough oxygen in the water. And so that stresses out those sections of the river below the dam tremendously on the refilling portion when the water is just basically stagnant.
Okay, last one from Athena, promise. Okay, the perception is that environmentalists are against it and fishermen are for keeping it. Are there any environmental benefits that the reservoir does provide? Are there non-fishermen that want to keep it for other reasons?
Okay, that sounds like another Jim Gross question.
Yeah.
Are there any environmental benefits to keeping the reservoir? Not in my definition of the word environmental benefits. It's a losing situation environmentally, I know. So we have all kinds of problems with water quality and with aquatic herbicides and mercury contamination, all these different things. Environmentally, it's a loser to keep the dam in place. Now, was the rest of it was economic?
Yeah, so are there any non-fishermen who want to keep it?
Are there any non-fishermen who are against it?
Yeah, who want to keep any non-fishermen who want to keep the dam.
You know, I haven't met any. I have not met anyone who wasn't a sport fishing enthusiast who liked to go fish behind the dam. And most of those people are locals who've grown up in that area. Remember, it's been there for over 50 years now. They've grown up, and many of them have never seen the river before it was dammed. And to them, this is what it is. This is natural. And they like it that way. And they don't know what it would be like restored. And it's a relatively small community. A number of those people who used to fish there or still do, and some of them even competed in tournaments there, have looked more carefully at the overall situation and have come around to the realization it doesn't make sense to continually damage this ecosystem by having the dam in place, especially in a place like Florida, where the principal argument is for largemouth bass fishing. And you can fish for largemouth bass in just about every county, all 67 counties in Florida. And then in this particular area of Florida, there's countless places to go. And the St. Johns River now looks to be a better place indeed for catching largemouth bass, particularly trophy bass, than upstream of the dam on the Ocklawaha River. So that's really the situation. There are some people who like it the way it is. They grew up with it and they want to keep it that way. And there's a few landowners who would like to have their waterfront property be more close to them. That's a little bit of that, but that's a very small number of people.
Well, we just keep coming around to that. There's a long list of reasons in favor of restoration, and few, if any, to argue against it.
Yeah. I have argued that during drawdowns, what often happens is that people go out and they build unpermitted docks while the water levels are down, so that when they come back again, they've got a boat dock where they can put in off their property. Those are all illegal. They're all illegal. And just recently, at FDE's urging, to some extent, the state has issued notices to those people that those are illegal docks and they can't keep them. Now, I would be in favor, and I think a lot of my colleagues would be in favor of letting those people off the hook and just taking care of that as part of restoration and not forcing those, not having no fines or costs for those people to remove their docks. And they're still going to have property, there's still going to be waterfront. It's just going to be a little bit farther to the water, and it's going to be better water. So I think we can manage the situation in a politically reasonable and calm way.
Okay, well, that was very thorough. So we're bumping up against 9. So we got some questions in the chat, but we're just going to handle this last one that was prior submitted, since I promised I would handle all of them. So this is from Pat Crocker. How can we elevate the issues around the Ocklawaha River and earn public support for the restoration when the status quo seems good enough for most people, so it's not an urgent problem? Quiet environmental catastrophes don't generate the same level of media coverage or public concern and support.
Well, you know, it sounds like, I don't know how you could share all this information that we've shared tonight through the film and through Jim's response to this slate of questions. It comes down to educating the public, and once they know the basics, as we've discussed them, I think there will be wide-ranging support. And I will share this for all of you who are members of the Florida Native Plant Society. We have embraced this as one of our priorities. We are a member of the coalition that Jim mentioned. We weren't, we were when they sent that letter to Governor DeSantis. We weren't really actively involved or signatories to that, but we're fully on board with FDE now and all the other members of that coalition. And we're really hopeful that we can mobilize our members and other members of the public, other organizations could do the same, to really mobilize public support and help make sure that this will be on the agenda during the 2022 legislative session. Let's get it done.
Absolutely. Well said, Gene.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for groups that are working together on, you know, these sort of low-grade environmental catastrophes, the problems we know about, but there's not a lot of public awareness. Like groups like Defenders of the Environment and the Florida Native Plant Society, you know, we have Gene, who is looking at policy issues. He's receiving reports from our lobbyists. You know, we have our chapters with their feet on the ground, paying attention to local issues, working on ballot initiatives, you know, trying to protect parks and, you know, make sure that they're being managed for rare native plants. So I think the best way to combat these sorts of issues, you know, to tackle these sorts of issues, are staying organized and being members of the Native Plant Society and contributing to your chapter by going to meetings and staying engaged when there's policy alerts and staying engaged when there's local issues, so that we know when we're thinking about taking action, like working on Ocklawaha stuff, we know that we have people to rely on and, you know, get the word out more.
The reach extends far beyond those areas immediately surrounding Rodman and the Ocklawaha River. You know, we talked about it. If you like to fish for bass in Lake Monroe and Sanford, you know, if you really understand, this is an issue that's relevant to you. If you're just a fiscal conservative and you don't like to see the state wasting money, this is relevant to you. I think we can spread the word, and all 67 counties have a stake in this. And I feel really good about the prospects because the arguments are so many in favor of it. And it's been 50 years. It's been far too long. I think that's one of the reasons why it's kind of faded into the background, and it's past time to bring it back to the forefront and get this get this fixed. This is one of those that falls in the no-brainer category.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But potentially a bit politically difficult to get accomplished. Thus, the political effort required to accomplish it. I mean, if it was a no-brainer and it was, air quote, easy in the current political climate, then it would just sort of have happened already, and it hasn't.
We'd already be underway in restoration based on the 2016 report by the Water Management District with the right political leadership. And we'd already be, it actually could already be substantially completed with the right political leadership. So political leadership and just, informing our elected leaders all the way up from local government all the way to the governor is very, very important. We just need to keep the message flowing. People of Florida want this to happen.
And so we covered all the questions that I received in advance. We got a couple of repeat questions, like a couple of people asking kind of the same question in the chat. How are you guys feeling? Do you want to handle another question?
Well, whatever.
You guys are good? Okay. There's some questions about partial restoration. What is your plan? How long is it going to take? Do you have to take out the whole dam? Can you give us a little overview of the restoration process?
Sure, that sounds like another Jim Gross question.
Yeah, it's definitely you.
So in 1995, the Florida legislature took some actions that came about because the preceding Canal Lands Advisory Committee completely failed to make a recommendation about the disposition of the canal lands. And so the Florida legislature came up with a game plan and $900,000 worth of money. And they said, we want you to look at, you being the state and the Water Management District, to look at 4 alternatives for restoration of the river. And restoration is maybe not the best word, but for the fate of the river. And 2 of them were like bookend type things, right? One is do nothing. It's just leave it the way it is. And then the other end, bookend, is take it all out, full restoration. And then there were 2 in between ones. One of them was kind of silly because it was just let the water be a little bit lower and upstream of the dam, but don't do anything else. Well, that one really wasn't effective for anything at all. It was silly, but it was something that the legislature came up with, and these, they're not scientists. But the one that was chosen is called partial restoration. And partial restoration is just this. All we need to achieve full ecological and economic restoration is just to do a few things. Take out a portion of the dam, a couple thousand feet. It's like about 5,000 feet. I need to take about a couple thousand feet of it out. So we have the channel, the natural channel, and some adjacent floodplain right there next to the channel. And that would be on the southeast side of the southwest side of the dam. And then we need to move a little bit of dirt around here and there to make sure that the river channel functions the way it used to, because when we dug the actual canal, so there's a little bit of dirt work that needed to be done to restore some of the hydrologic connectivity. And then there was some work that needed to be done about the lock itself and closing it down as well. And then just below the dam to fill in some of that area that's called the tail race just below the dam. So the partial restoration plan was get the most bang for the buck in terms of ecological and economic benefits for the least amount of money. Everybody looked at that and went, yep, that's the one. The state of Florida looked at it and said 2 thumbs up. The Forest Service, who had a stake in the game, they said 2 thumbs up to that. And so that was what was going on when Lott and Childs in 1995 said, go forth and restore. It was the partial restoration alternative that had been launched and was in play until 1999 when St. John's Water Management District and the state agreed to put the permit on hold until studies could prove that it was safe to restore the river. Those studies are done.
Okay, and then we have Steve. I think we just need to I think we need to hammer this point home. So Steve was like, is there a reason the dam is still in place? And I mean, people are spending money on maintaining it. Is there a reason other than we can't make the political will to get rid of it?
There's no other reason. It makes sense ecologically, economically, but politically it can be very contentious, and the people who are pro status quo have an unusual amount of say on this. Let me just say how that works in the legislature. We put in a legislation and submitted it, and it went into bill drafting up in Tallahassee and emerged out of bill drafting, slightly revised, but not much. This was, when I say we, this is the coalition, a whole bunch of very smart people, smarter than me, about drafting legislation that will fly. But I participated in it too, in lots of different meetings to refine the language in this proposed legislation. It was up there, and we had legislators in both houses willing to support it, including Democrats and Republicans alike. But who's got the levers of control right now? It's not the Democrats. Republicans are in command, and so here's what happened. While there were plenty of Republicans that were willing to sponsor this, they weren't going to do it if it was against the wishes of even one local Republican. And that's exactly what happened. The local guy there, Bobby Payne, represents Putnam County, was not ready for this. He isn't very well informed about what we know today. And so he wasn't ready for it. And so we could not get this in as something to be voted on, by the full chamber. So we didn't make it with legislation this year. We still have the opportunity for an executive order to get started. And perhaps next year we'll have the opportunity for legislation to come about.
Great answer. Thank you. So I think that's everything. We have a lot of thanks in the chat, and lots of good stuff coming along. So if you guys have
very
any
engaged audience.
Yeah, this has been really great. I really appreciate everybody hopping in the chat. It was great to see everybody.
Can you save the chat?
Yes, I can until I edit it. So normally I edit out the little black space in the beginning because I streamed the black
I'd love
screen.
to see a copy of it.
Okay, yeah. So I'll make sure if I do edit, I'll screenshot it for you. And it looks like, let's just go over, Sip and Learn is winning with 5 votes. So, I might have to clip out, looks like I'm going to have to clip out the beginning that's branded Drink and Learn, because we're going to be a Sip and Learn if we don't get additional votes. Or maybe we'll do a runoff. We could take, so Sip and Learn is top, and then Native Plant Happy Hour is coming in, and then Dine and Discourse has 3 votes, and then Flower Power Happy Hour and Dine and Learn each have 2 votes. So this could get fun, guys.
This is a form of democracy I'm not completely familiar with.
I look forward to future iterations, whatever it's called.
Okay, great. Yes, Patty next month. It's going to be great. We're going to talk about her life and journey to becoming a botanist, which was a very, very fascinating journey that I've only heard a little bit about. And hopefully we'll get a song. She won't promise to sing. All right, any last words, Gene, Jim?
Just thank you to everybody. Thank you for Florida Native Plant Society for sponsoring this, and proud to be working with you.
We are very proud to be working with you.
Those of you who are members of the Native Plant Society and you're signed up to receive action alerts, just as kind of a preview of coming attractions, this will be a priority, and we will be asking you to, at some point in time in the not too distant future, to help us move this proposal along.
take action.
Yeah.
All right. Everybody have a great Wednesday night. Thank you for attending this inaugural evening Florida Native Plant Society event. I hope you enjoyed it. Send me emails, feedback, whatever, vote on the name. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.